So farming is one of those topics that continues to become kind of front page news, especially during the crisis of 2020 with COVID-19. We're going to get a chance to talk about that today. My name is Paul Barron, and this is the Barron Report. We're going to dig into, we've looked at everything from urban farming to container farming to aquaponics, all sorts of different types of new age farming and growth. And today we're going to talk with Andrew Carter, who is the CEO and co-founder at a company named SmallHold. Great to have you on the show, Andrew.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Excellent. All right, so let's jump into it. SmallHold, when we saw this, I was intrigued, and I thought this is a very interesting topic, and it works with a lot of different areas. Tell me a little bit about the concept.
Yeah, so what we're doing is we figured out a way with both technology and our own proprietary supply chain to grow fresh, hyperlocal, certified organic mushrooms as close as possible to the consumer. It started inside restaurants and retailers, and we have some pretty new and exciting evolutions of the product coming to market over the next couple of years that we're pretty excited about.
Yeah, for our viewers and listeners, this is essentially a farm in a box, so to speak. It takes a very small amount of square footage. Talk to me a little bit about kind of the technology inside the box itself for the growing systems. What does it take to operate one of these, that kind of thing?
Yeah, of course. So if we're based in Brooklyn, New York, if you go into Whole Foods Gowanus, for example, you can actually see one of our units in action. This is right on the floor. Like, you can walk into the store and see this beautiful display that's growing up to 100 pounds per week that consumers can then just buy by the pound if they so desire.
Wow.
The unit itself has specific spectrum LEDs for the mushrooms. We use it's a blue and into the UV spectrum light that's very specific for mushroom production. And each shelf is capturing thousands of data points per day, pushing that information to our database through a cellular network where we can make sure that we're running the best recipes possible for each variety that we're growing. The user itself, which is a retailer or a restaurant, they don't have to really have any readout or look at their cell phone or have any of that control, because we're doing all of that from our own centralized headquarters, also in Brooklyn. And we're expanding that into other restaurants, into other retailers, and then other sorts of locations as well.
Yeah, I could see that, where that being a big advantage. They don't have to become a farmer, which is, that in itself is a difficult task. So this essentially is an IoT device. You guys, of course, are connected up to it all the time. What kind of readings are you getting back, and what kind of modifications are you making in the program or the protocol to help make the harvest the most beneficial? Are there certain things in terms of how fast it's growing? Are there certain kind of nutrients that are missing? How do you respond to that when the machine says, hey, I got to do something here?
Yeah, totally. So it's mostly automated. So, in the beginning, we had to create the recipes that we are growing. We grow 11 different varieties. Each of them are from different regions. And so they require different sorts of climates and environments. Mushrooms in particular are really sensitive to the climate and the lighting rather than any sort of nutrient inputs that you might have for, like, let's say, a hydroponic or aquaponic kind of facility. And so we don't have to actually input any nutrients. We have to just make sure that it has the best climate possible. And it's kind of a complicated climate because it's high humidity, low CO2. The mushrooms actually produce a little bit of CO2. And also relatively cool. Most of the mushrooms that we grow prefer between 62 to 67 degrees Fahrenheit. Some of them get up to about 80. So when you're in an environment like a restaurant or a grocery store, so we have to make sure that it has the right climate that's necessary.
Interesting. Very cool. Yeah. I like that. Okay, so square footage doesn't take a lot in terms of power requirements. I'm assuming that's fairly low voltage as well. I don't need special power requirements to use something like this. I'm kind of curious, could this thing grow cannabis?
We've been asked that before. It would need some modifications, but technically it probably could. We're very much focused on mushroom production just because we see such a big opportunity in the mushroom industry. There aren't quite so many industry leaders in not only specialty mushrooms, but mushrooms in general. And we see applying our technology and applying our supply chain to not only these kind of on-site experiences, but just the mushroom industry in general.
Right.
There's a huge opportunity out there to be just growing tons. So we're definitely going after that right now.
Well, mushrooms are a great plant-based product when you're looking at doing, whether it's plant-based burgers, things like that. We see a lot of recipes that are really starting to leverage kind of the varietals of mushrooms. When you look at the kind of companies that are deploying these, how fast can a cycle take to get me a harvest and then be able to recycle that and get it ready to start producing more product?
Yeah, so to work with SmallHold, if you have one of our on-site productions, you essentially are subscribing to a service where we're providing substrates and we're providing a whole experience around that. And so essentially when you install one of our units, it's ready to harvest within a week. And then we're having harvests every week with those customers. That's because they're kind of the end node of this larger distributed farm where we're managing raw materials, we're managing the supply chain again, and we're making sure that they have the best quality substrates and the best quality inputs possible. Our operation is certified GAP, certified organic, and so there's a lot of sort of protocol and regulation that we need to follow to make sure that we're providing the cleanest, safest product. That a lot of the time gets kind of left by the wayside if people kind of are doing this on their own. And so that's why we have to also sort of track everything and make sure everything's going as well as possible.
I like that. Well, and just for safety reasons, there's a lot of mechanics behind this. When you look at it, distributed farming, because essentially that's what you guys are doing, you're setting up pods around the city, or maybe as you look at even further distribution into suburban areas. This is kind of a new model that I've talked to a lot of experts, and I'm very fascinated with this in terms of farming and how the evolution of that could really take place. Do you see this as a real potential at being able to go to scale, being able to really leverage a lot of those nook and crannies of almost every community out there to be able to operate something of this nature?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's how we're approaching it. And we're a relatively small company, but we're already working with some of the biggest retailers in the country, and as well as restaurant groups in bringing this to market. The fact that we are growing so close to the consumer brings a whole bunch of different varieties that weren't really normally on your supermarket shelf. So we grow lion's mane, for example, maitake mushrooms, even pink oyster mushrooms. A lot of these mushrooms actually have a pretty low shelf life. And so when you're trying to ship this from across the country to one of these places, it just does not stay up, and the consumers just generally don't have access to it. And so by using the technology and the supply chain and just the method that we've developed, we're able to bring that to the markets where it's literally never been before. And that's very exciting for a lot of these retailers, because it's not like we're going and replacing something else. It's just a completely new product for them.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the retail and especially the restaurant side of it. I noticed you guys had several locations there in New York. Can you kind of talk about the deployment process? What does it take to get started with you guys? How does that roll out?
Yeah, so it definitely depends on kind of the approach. So we have some amazing restaurant customers that have got us to do custom installations. And so if you check out our website or our Instagram, you can see some of these are hanging from the ceiling, or are very involved with the aesthetic of the restaurant, which is a very important thing. Those are custom installations, but they are controlled by again our proprietary sensor system and software system, and so all of that is modular. It's just kind of the layout depends on that location. Majority of our customers are using our standardized unit. That is a unit that just rolls in. Again, you just plug it into an outlet. We need a water hookup, but it's not anything serious. We can use a pretty small tube. We don't have to go in and do any construction or anything like that. And then it's connected to our cellular network, and so you don't actually have to even connect it to your Wi-Fi router or anything like that. And so the process of using that is fairly simple. It just kind of depends on how far you want to take it.
Yeah. Do you guys go through a training process, obviously, on harvesting? Sometimes I would see, especially you started mentioning some very rare mushrooms. And this, I guess, for a chef, that's a nirvana of them being able to get access to something like this and really introduce it on a menu item or something like that, especially even in the area of retail grocery. What has been the consumer adoption to this kind of approach toward kind of these mini farms?
Yeah, I mean, people are extremely excited about it. It really depends on where it is. With the restaurants, we have a really long list of people that want these installations. Even post COVID, we're in New York. The restaurant industry has been hit pretty hard here. I have a lot of faith that it'll bounce back, and a lot of our restaurant customers are definitely bouncing back, which is a very good sign. But we're definitely trying to keep an eye on that and be as supportive as possible. With the retailers, in Whole Foods, for example, after we installed, we saw that they doubled their mushroom sales with the installation of our unit. And so not only does it help us out because we're selling more of SmallHold mushrooms, but we're actually helping the whole mushroom category out and just bringing more visibility into a commonly overlooked section of the produce aisle.
Yeah, for sure. Plant-based trends way up, pre-COVID. Obviously now when people look at it as more of an initiative to kind of change their healthy eating process, do you see this being a major trend going forward to where you guys could start expanding into other items other than mushrooms? What's kind of the plan there?
Yeah, so we really want to focus on mushrooms. I think that there's a very large opportunity in not only just growing mushrooms and eating into the mushroom market, but eating into other markets that are out there. As you kind of mentioned earlier, there's obvious trend in alternate proteins and sort of meat replacements. A lot of those businesses actually use mushrooms as their base. Mushrooms are a very carbon friendly and water friendly source of protein, and so there's potential of providing materials for companies like that. But we actually see alternate proteins possible beyond all those kinds of things as more of a stepping stone in the American diet. There's a lot of room for mushrooms as people start to eat less meat. We actually saw that post-COVID. There was a lot of numbers that came out from the grocery store industry. The whole produce aisle spiked, about 9 or 10%. That was across the produce aisle, but mushrooms saw a 20% spike right after COVID. They think that that's because people are eating at home, cooking, being more health conscious, and all of those things together mean that people are eating a little less meat.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so let's talk about supply chain, because I could see this being a real solution to some of the supply chain problems that we've had. If you could get enough critical mass here to really sustain some fairly large production capabilities. How does that play into your strategy moving forward? Could we see smallhold units that are a little bit larger, bigger, more kind of industrial type units that could be used in different operations?
Absolutely, yeah. That is exactly kind of the next step that we're working on, and we're very excited about the developments over the next couple months. We're based in New York. A lot of the mushroom industry in the U.S. is actually not too far from here in Kennett Township, outside of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. And even them, they had a lot of issues bringing mushrooms into the city. And we have these large retailers that struggled to get from literally the largest mushroom farms on the planet. They couldn't get mushrooms, a few hours away. And we were here, we have the supply, and we were able to supply it. We are not excited at all about the global pandemic that's going on right now, but it definitely shines some light on different companies that are innovating around supply chain, this is kind of the sort of situation that a lot of people were talking about over the last few years, and by decentralizing the actual production and bringing that closer to the consumer, then we actually can be a little more resilient when there are issues with supply chain like we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I could see this being a major factor, especially the fact that this is cloud-based. You're using a cellular network to essentially basically handle an IoT device. Low maintenance, apparently low water consumption for the scenario of at least the mushroom side of it. And I've found that to be very similar in a lot of other aquaponic type systems out there. We've seen some, some of the farm in a box type systems where you've got like a container back behind your building and you can grow 15 different varietals of herbs and greens and stuff. That seems like a solution that could become very effective. Is the supply chain people and the companies that you've talked to, are they starting to embrace this idea and this technology going forward, or do you feel like there's still some kind of holdback for this advancement?
I think there's a lot of excitement in it, especially with what's happening right now. Almost, all types of produce have had issues with their supply chain, and so these large produce buyers are just scrambling to find a better solution, just in case this happens again, or there's another sort of issue because they've just experienced it in a really rough way. And so, yes, put the operations like SmallHold or like other operations trying to figure out new ways to grow produce in uncommon areas is definitely something that people are looking at. I think that the very important thing is that, agriculture is huge and food is huge. There are all sorts of different ways of growing, and I don't think there is any one way that is the only way of growing. I think that certain crops make sense in greenhouses, other crops make sense in fields. Mushrooms, and especially the smallhold mushrooms, make sense to be growing all over cities and near consumers with the smallhold technology.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, I'm really excited about this. I have one last question for you, and it's kind of the bigger question of, when you look at food deserts, even here in the United States, but even more so when you get outside the U.S., there are a lot of countries that have problems in being able to get sustained, great quality produce. With this kind of technology, especially on a global scale, and especially if you're capable of moving this into more industrialized type systems, do you guys look at this being a potential solution for countries and regions that are struggling with being able to really grow great produce because of just whether it's their climate, their access to water, all the variations that really cause a problem in great crop growth?
Yes,
kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that is exactly what we want to be dealing with in the near future. One of the most interesting ways, that our supply chain kind of works is because we're working with sort of a living process through that whole entire thing. The substrates and the mycelium and the mushrooms are actually growing whenever we're shipping anything. And so if we have to supply substrates or we have to supply part of our process pretty far away, we are not dealing with a decaying, dying crop. Like what normally happens when you try to go and ship a case of mushrooms or a pallet of leafy greens from Mexico, US, Canada, to other countries or other regions. It's innovations like this that are necessary to really kind of distribute agriculture and distribute this quality of produce, and change quality of life and just bring the right food to the right regions. And it's definitely something that we're looking at doing over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I love that. Grow on the way.
Yeah, exactly.
So to speak. Andrew, it's been great having you here on the show today. Good luck to what you guys are doing at SmallHold. I think you guys are onto something there for sure.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
All right, absolutely. All right, so you guys are tuning in over on Spotify. Maybe you're catching us on iTunes. Make sure and subscribe, and also leave us a comment or a rating. That's how we get great feedback from you, our audience, and it's also how we learn what you really want to hear, listen, and watch on the Barron Report. If you've got something that is kind of changing the game, that's really what this show is about, is the players, the movers and shakers in the restaurant, hospitality, and food categories that are really starting to shift how we do things. And as we all know, our businesses have changed forever. So hopefully you can send those ideas and tips right to us. You can catch me over on Twitter, just at Paul Barron. And of course, if you have an idea for the show, just shoot us an email to producer@foodabletv.com. We will catch you next time right here on the Barron Report.